So I'm going to talk a little bit about the historical context for hides, and then go into some detail about what we've got here at Townley. But I thought it'd be interesting to show you other hides from around the country as well, because there's an astonishing variety of them. Would put a little bit of it. I'm awful with dates. I'm not a professional historian. I'm a professional operator of PowerPoint, which is quite convenient for these purposes. But it's useful to understand something of the context. So 1500 to 1625, very turbulent time in English history. 1500, Henry VII was still firmly in the medieval era. The Wars of the Roses come to a finish. I cannot remember whether that was good for Lancashire or not, but they finished at that point. Then we all know about Henry VIII and his 6 wives, the Reformation, the dissolution of the monastery. Henry, if you'd asked him on his deathbed, would have insisted that he was a Catholic. I'm not sure the Pope would entirely have agreed with that perception, but then it all depends. He was followed by Edward, who was very much a Protestant, and then the pendulum swung back with Mary. Edward and Mary didn't last particularly long, and then we had Elizabeth's very long reign, where she tried to split the difference. So we had the Elizabethan religious settlement and the prayer book and so on. Towards the end of her reign, the pendulum swung back. I don't want to point fingers, but the Catholics started sending priests into England, and as you'll see on the next slide, that caused a certain amount of trouble, both for Elizabeth and for the Catholics. So the hides that I'm showing you were by and large built in the last quarter of the 16th century and the beginning of the 17th century. Two important dates: the Spanish Armada in 1588 and the Gunpowder Plot in 1605. Those 2 dates bookend the career of one Nicholas Owen, who is the best known of hide builders. So we're going to zoom in on that. And so here's 1560 to 1610. Anything in green is a plot. And you see we had the Northern Earls plot, the Throckmorton plot, the Babington plot, the M&B, which stands for the main plot and the by-plot, we're into James's, and then the Gunpowder Plot, which probably doesn't need an awful lot of introduction. At this point, the Catholics were sending priests into England, and that caused great alarm within the government, because England was very much essentially a Catholic country with a thin veneer of I'll call it Protestant, probably not quite the right term, government on top. And they were quite rightly, probably quite rightly, afraid of what would happen if the pendulum swung the other way. So they reacted as only Tudor governments could react. And so we have this period of which it became first more difficult and then illegal to be a Catholic priest in this country, and the penalty for that was death, and the penalty for sheltering a Catholic priest, for accommodating one, also became death. So the priests were in a situation where not only their necks were very literally on the line, but also that of their hosts. And that's where this hide building, so we're going to build hides in houses. There is a surprising amount of documentation, both from the priest's side and the government side, of what was going on. So some of what I'm going to say will sound utterly fantastical and fictional, but we can back it all up back to source documents. So the leading spearhead of this movement was the Jesuits, headed by Henry Garnet. He employed an Oxfordshire carpenter called Nicholas Owen, who did a lot of hide, between coincidentally the Armada and the Gunpowder Plot, Owen spent 18 odd years building hides, so a lot of his hides survive. So the colour, yes, green is some kind of plot. The pink ones there are searches of the various houses, and I'm going to be talking about some of those, and that'll probably do for dates. So we're in the last quarter of the 17th century. Okay, so I have a house, my manor house. I wish to hide a priest in it. Where can I put one? Timber framed house, it's not that easy to find some space, because a hide has to be a reasonably large space. I mean, they tend not to be particularly luxurious, but you've got to be able to put an adult human being in one, so it's got to be sort of like that square minimum, and that's a lot of space to make disappear. One common pattern is called a hutch under the guardrobe, a hide under the guardrobe. So this is at Harvington Hall. That is a guardrobe, so that is a chute that goes down to the moat, and that's a floor, and that's got a trapdoor in it, and that is an original trapdoor. So that's one common place to put a hide. The problem with that is that it leaves you with, so this is actually a different house, but the pattern is exactly the same. There is a bedroom there with a fireplace, and the red is the hide, and and that's a lot of outside brick wall. And if you measure the outside brick wall and measure the rooms inside and you find they don't add up, you can detect a hide. And Father John Gerard, who was a Jesuit priest, who survived this whole thing, he escaped England after the Gunpowder Plot and wrote an autobiography. So that's one of the places that we get all this information from. Said the searchers go around and they measure the outside and they measure the inside. On your right, Coton Court, it's even more obvious. There was well, there still is actually, but it's blocked off, a staircase up to first floor here. That's a turret room, and then there's a double-decker hide underneath it. And you look at it from the outside, and a searcher would go, I'm going to have a closer look in there. Where else can we put a hide? If you've ever been into the roof of an Elizabethan, they're a complete rabbit's nest. Rabbit warren. Rat's nest, right? So we also find quite a lot of partitioned off bits of the roof, which colloquially we call a hutch in the roof, lath and plaster hutch in the roof. This is a genuine hide. It's I'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute. So that is a seat on which Anne Elizabeth Vaux spent 4 hours during a search, and it's just a bare space in the roof with the door. The door's gone, but that's what that black square is. And the other great place, well, another great place to put is a chimney stack. Because a chimney stack is a huge brick or stone. There's lots. You can take quite a lot of that stone out, and the building won't fall down because there's much more. Their engineering wasn't as precisely calculable, so they just basically built as much stone as they thought it would take. This is, and we need to keep this place in mind, because one of the hides upstairs is very, very similar to this. So these two pictures are looking towards each other. So this fireplace and this fireplace back onto each other. And up the top there's a little, can you see that screen? That's a plan view of it. And the hide is behind this bit, and access from a trapdoor above. So they either quarried out, I think that's probably what they did, this corner of it. And that's in the middle of the building. You can't find that by measuring the outside walls. And you can't, without chiseling out, work out whether that's solid block work or whether it's got a hide inside it. And the last, and probably the most fiendish place to hide a hide, is in a staircase, because you're going up a staircase, it's a spiral staircase, you're going round, you lose sense of direction completely. Anybody who's ever come out of the London Underground and gone, I thought it was that way, has fallen to the victim to the thing that the hide built. We know this hide was built by Nicholas Owen, because Gerard tells us it was. And the staircase is inside this turret. The top landing of it has, so the stairs are just at the top of the picture. As you come up the stairs, you can see the underneath of these boards. So you can look up through, so the staircase is through there, and you can actually look up and see 2/3 of the trapdoor. And the hide is down there. So the way it works is like this. These two planks of the trapdoor, but the hide is underneath here, and it's, sorry, I lost my, it's concealed by the stair turret. It's because it's sandwiched between the staircase and the house. Okay, and and that's looking down to it. And there's a seat, and there's a circular void which would be filled with soil, and I'll leave the rest to your imagination. How many hides were there? Lots. Owen spent 18 years building hides. This is a map I did a couple of years ago. The red dots are houses where there used to be hides, but the house has either been demolished or the hide is no longer visible. The green, to a first approximation, is there is still a hide of some kind there. Most of them are private houses. I'm going to talk now about 4 actual searches. So these are all searches that there are written records of. First one is a place called Baddesley Clinton. There was in 1591 October, there was a meeting of the Jesuits. Somebody tipped off the local magistrates, who came knocking on the door at 6 o'clock one morning. Fortunately for all concerned, round the back of the hall, so here's the moat, there was a sewer which vented by these lights. This is sort of end on, so that's the end of the sewer, sort of looking that way. At some point, all of these ventilation lights were blocked up and camouflaged. This bit was added later, and the shafts behind this are still blocked off. And we can see that and one of them down here somewhere is still, and the lavatory, the guardrobe up here, and its shaft that serviced the sewer was pressed into service to be the entrance to a hide. And 2 of the 7 priests who spent the morning in there wrote an account of what happened. The search wasn't very thorough, and eventually the searchers were bribed to go away, and they arrived half drunk apparently. But the description of the hide and the fact that it was built by Owen still survives. Inside the hide, so that is looking up to the sort of from underneath here, looking up to the trap door. That's some bloke who's lost a bit of weight since that photograph was taken. This is the inside of the hide, looking either way from the shaft. And eventually, when the persecutions had died down, it was it returned to its original use, and so the shaft at the end was reopened. 3 years later, one of the priests who had been in the hide at Baddesley was nearly caught at a place called Braddock's, which is in Essex. That search is fascinating because we know that this hide was built by Owen because Gerard, who's the priest, tells us he was. We've also got the spy's report that led to the search, still exists in the state papers. The spy was a semi-trusted servant of the family. They didn't quite trust him, but they trusted him more than, as it turned out, was safe. So Easter Monday 1594, they were setting up to say Mass in this room here, which is the chapel. House was surrounded by hooves, and this is the most detailed and vivid account we have of what it was like to be in a search. There was a hide, there were 2 hides in the house. One of them, not this one, had food in it, provisions for a few days' search. But under the pressure of time, the owner of the house, Mrs. Wiseman, said, no, get in this one. And this hide is accessed. This trap door is actually a modern one. Gerard tells us he just lifted part of the fireplace. So this was built in about this entrance was built in about 1930. So originally you've got to think in terms of just a trap door lifting up. But anyway, the hearth had been was a fake hearth. Well, it was originally a real hearth, and then and that's looking down into it. And this chap spent 4 days in there, as it turned out, in constant fear of his life. And I have been in it, well, to take this photograph. It's quite tight. That's down in it looking up. If you look at the way this beam has been sort of cut off, you wouldn't be able to get in and out if it hadn't. So it's about sort of that wide, sort of about that long. And it was carved out of the chimney stack. And so that's looking down into it. Then that's down into it, looking back up out. And over here you can see this is the plasterwork of the room below the chapel from the inside of the hide. You can see there's nothing there except the lath and plasters, which have been replaced at some point because these uprights have been used and turned round. So here's a view from, so there's the chapel. Here's how the hide works. There's a couple of steps in it, which you can just about see here. The room below is the great chamber. It had a huge panelled overmantel, partly covering the hide. Searchers arrived. The first thing they did was locked all the family up, just confiscated all the keys, went around searching. Now they knew that the priest was in the house. And they thought he was, they'd surrounded the house before they'd announced themselves. They knew their prey was there somewhere. They have complete carte blanche to tear the house apart, more or less literally, and that's what they started to do. After 2 days, they sort of thought, maybe he did get away after all. Right, okay, we'll call the search off. We're going to take the family up to London for interrogation. So Mrs. Wiseman now has a problem, because if she leaves Gerard in the hide, he's going to starve to death. The servant, John Frank his name was, she sort of trusts him, but innate caution takes over. So what she says is, because he's a Protestant, and they knew that, so he's not going to be arrested. So what she says to him is, when everyone's gone, go into the great chamber and call out, and Father Gerard will tell you how to get him out. At which point Frank makes a complete strategic error, because instead of doing that, he tells the searchers, and they immediately restart the search. Instead of just saying, oh, they've gone, and having him come out, and then what's more, they now know roughly where the hide is. The next thing that happens was that they found the other hide, which is nobody knows where it is, but sort of tantalisingly, it may still exist, but the present owners of the house don't know where it is, but it's quite close by. And so Gerard records that he heard the shouts of triumph and then the dismay when all they found was the food. And he's thinking, I'm glad I didn't go in. And at that point, there's a seed of doubt planted in the searchers. Well, we found the hide and it's close to here, so maybe that's the one she's talking about. However, as a last throw of the dice, they decide they're going to strip all the panelling and tapestry from this room. That's a big room. They start, and I'm not making this up, here, and they go this way round the room. And they get to here. And the only thing left is this big panelled overmantel, and at that point they give up. The night before, there had been 2 guards in the chapel. There would be guards in every, and they lit a fire in this fireplace, which has a wooden floor. And so the brickwork, the fake brickwork, sort of began to give under the heat. And Gerard in his hide heard them going, that's something a bit, sorry, I told this bit of the story out of order. Do forgive me. Told them, oh, that's a bit strange. We need to look at that in the morning. Morning, they'd forgotten all about it. She's just as, and they can't even have looked into the hut because at that point, most of this trapdoor had burned through. And Gerard had spent the night sheltering right up at the other end of the hide as bits of burning ash fell on him. And when the hide was refound in 1934, there were bits of charred wood in the base of the hide, which are now at Stonyhurst, which is not a million miles from here. So, yeah, they gave up. They thought, we've been here for 4 days. He's probably starved to death if he is anywhere, and they went home. But that gives us a really vivid picture of what it was like. Another narrow escape. So, Scotney Old Castle in Kent. Beautiful, romantic ruin. It was less it was ruined and romanticised by the Victorians, who built their big hall up on the hill, and wanted a ruined castle to look at. And they got a castle. All they needed to do was ruin it. But and a couple of important bits of it survive. Halfway up a staircase that now leads to a blank wall here because they've knocked it down is a cupboard in the wall, and that cupboard leads to here. And then there's another bit of cupboard up here, but underneath here is a, if I go back, yes, you can see here, the underneath of that is the hide. And it had originally, the trapdoor is now lying on the floor inside the hide, which is a bit sad. But so these two pictures are from the 1960s when it was there. You can see it slides on, and the runners that it slides on are still there. The priest, who was a Father Blount, and his servant, who's somebody Bray, spent, well, it says 8 days, but I don't quite believe that, in there. And they were on the verge of starving when Bray took advantage of a lull in the, the melee, to slip out of the hide and give himself up to the searchers. So they thought, oh, great, we've got him. And he said, oh, I've been hiding. There was another hide. And he said, I've been hiding in there, but I'm starving to death, So they took him away thinking he was the priest. Of course, under cross-examination, it rapidly became apparent he wasn't. And so Blount escaped. And that was the hide they used. There's an even more thrilling story of the same pair escaping another search from a hide that no longer exists because it was in part of where they ended up swimming the moat at dead of night. So that one's a view into the hide there. The fourth and the last search story that I'm going to tell is a slightly left field one. So we've seen this place before. It's Ufton Court, where in Berkshire, where the hide is behind this wall, and this is the view down into the hide from the trapdoor, and you can see this wonderful ladder which has just been sitting quietly in that closet for 400 years. When we went there, we took our own ladder because it isn't very. The story here is slightly more entertaining. This hide, the owner of the house had been using this hide as a safety deposit box for a friend of his, and he'd got an awful lot of money, something over £1 million in today's money, in gold and silver. His brother, in cahoots with a couple of their servants, had stolen some of that money and then tipped the magistrates off that there were Jesuits in the house and a great store of treasure for nefarious purposes. Please come and search it and confiscate it. And that's what the magistrates did. Parkins, that's the name of the dishonest brother, was hoping to cover his tracks. He thought the money will all be taken away and nobody will know how much there's supposed to be. But the owner of the house and the owner of the money then sued the government for the return of the money on the grounds that it's just money, we're entitled to keep money in a safe in our house, you can't prove anything. And the court case ran on for the next decade. And of course, all the court records survive. So there's a huge amount of detail, including a description of the search. But there's very little doubt that this was built as a priest hide, and it's got a really fascinating feature. In fact, the three of the four hides in this house have this. This is a wooden bolt with, and the bit that I've coloured orange is a spring with a cord. So you pull the cord that way, obviously the bolt moves that way. If you release the cord, the spring will push the bolt back shut. So we've got a wooden spring bolt. And there's one of those on the underside, here it is, it's not the greatest photograph, of this trapdoor. So there's the bolt, there's what's left of the spring, and what is not at all visible on here is that is what this ring is, and it's a nail with a loop in the end. That's it from above, which is, and you can see that loop there lines up with that hole in the bolt. So you open this trap door by pulling that nail out, which pulls the cord that way and opens the trap door. Well, as the searchers had been tipped off as to where the hide was, that defence didn't keep the secret of the hide. There are 3 other hides at the same place. This is up in the roof. That's a full height plaster door, and that has a much larger, and you can see the big problem with these spring bolts is that the spring breaks, and when it's done that, you can't open the door anymore because it's shut and there's no, particularly if in breaking it takes the cord with it. You can see there the hole and the hole for the cord. And these ones have got another slight refinement, which is they've got a second spring, because if you're the cord actually would come out in the next room. So you pull the cord, and now you've got to get round the corner to get to the door without letting go of the cord, or otherwise it'll spring shut again. So they've got a second spring here, which pushes the door open. And that's also broken. So it's not, this is the only place where these spring bolts exist. So, right, let's come a little bit closer to home. I give you Townley Hall in Burnley. As it is now, and as it was in the beginning of the 18th century. I'm assuming that the contents of that slide, you might be aware of it. But if you're not, it's an astonishing document written by Ursula Townley, probably around 1712, listing, well, I get 10 if I count them. Secret places, the private places at Townley Hall. Some people make it 9, but it depends whether you... So, and the challenge then is how many of these places survive, and how many of them can we say this is where that was. It looks like there are 3 groups of them, and the largest group, the library and the chapel, are in the block that is no longer here. That is debatable. A chap named an author in the early 20th century did make tentative identifications of some of these spaces with where the library and the chapel are now, but it seems more likely that it was in this block. The second, it's not a group, the second of my categories is at the steps going from the stone stairs to the garret, a step may be taken out where there is a large place over the green parlour, and that is the hide that I guess you've all seen, you're all aware of. Some of you may have been in. And that's really kind of our anchor point for this. What are the bona fides of this document? Is it a genuine document? Does it really describe what was there? Well, that is there, and that is indisputable. So we think these are probably plausible. Why did she write that letter? Well, a couple of the Townleys had died quite young, and I think she was afraid that the secret was going to be lost. There are no other, like, here are all of our hiding places documents that have survived to this day. The third, and in some ways the most intriguing, because the most mysterious, is the gallery over there. In the second room in the gallery, the wainscoting opens in the middle of the chimney upon hinges where there is a hole in the wall not very big. Well, the gallery's still there, so is that hide still there? And in the third room in the gallery is the close stool closet, so a box with a hole in the top full of soil, you can fill in the rest. The panel towards the garden has a latch within, which is opened with an iron pin at a hole in the door, which lifts up the latch, which may be made fast by those within. It has a seat and will hold 2 persons. Where's that space? So first of all, second room and third room in the gallery, which end are we counting from? Which is the first? The gallery is numbered 3, 4, 5, 6, I think, at the moment. But those numbers up there are much more recent than this. So let's look at the staircase side. So that's what Ursula Townley wrote. At the steps going up to the gallery, a stair may be taken out where there is a large place over the green gallery. And, well, there are the stairs going from... Well, those are the stone stairs. There are the stairs going up to the garret. There's the, I assume the blue plastic has now been replaced by something else, but that was what was there when we came. And the underneath of those stairs. So just on a show of hands, how many of you have been into that hide? Like a couple, all right. you might find people ask, so if the stairs are fairly firmly nailed down now, but if you did take that stair out and went underneath, that's the underneath of that staircase. Yeah. So that's the original way into this house. If you take a stone, and there is very little doubt that you could describe that as a large place. It is, in fact, the largest hide that has survived that we know of. Just to give you an idea of scale, I mean, it's colossal. There's no other word for it. And it's a brilliant piece of disguised engineering. If we flip back to here, what they've done behind it's the whole of the space under here, with a false ceiling on the room below, which was the green parlour. It's not green now, I don't believe. And again, exploiting the staircase. The change, it's very difficult to keep your directions. So that's the staircase hide, and absolutely unique. Also remarkable for the clay on the floor, which is sound deadening. And when we were looking at it, Phil, my colleague, said, you were talking in the hide, and I was standing in the room above. I could barely hear you because the clay just soaks up the sound. This is my theory. I believe it to be correct for reasons which I will describe. So the gallery, we have two hides. Ursula Townley tells us they were there. She tells us how to get at them, but they don't. What's there at the moment doesn't match with what she says. So let's have some thinking, and let's look at this maid's bedroom halfway along the gallery, and let's think about. Now, today, that maid's bedroom has a little fireplace here. It has a door giving access. It has no access from either of these rooms, and it has a window. But it's very clear that at the beginning of the 18th century, it didn't have a window here, and it didn't have a door from the gallery. But if it did have a closet accessed from each room, then you could do, and if one of those closets had a square box with a hole and some soil in it, it would be the close stool closet. In which case, and if that was there, you could go through there, you could turn towards the garden, and there would be enough space, exactly like the hide with the two chimneys often that I showed you before, just about enough space for two people, for a hide for two people. So that is my theory. And you can say, well, there might have been 4 closets, or maybe there was a big one there from this side and a big one there from this side. That's kind of a detail that I'm not too hung up on. But if we flip back to here, there was no window there, there is no door there, so this space is all void and unoccupied. But Ursula tells us that one of the rooms off the gallery, the second or the third, and I could have this the other way around. I think she means third by this and second by that, but it could be the other way around. But the argument would still tell you the hide is between those two fireplaces. And if we assume that this is the third, then that tells us that the little hide in the wainscot is probably still there behind the panelling in that room. But it might have been filled in, but if it is, if that panelling ever comes off, there will be, I guarantee, a square, a little rectangular. It'll either be a void, or it'll be a void that somebody's filled up with mortar. So the wainscoting opens in the middle of the chimney, where there is a hole in the wall, not very big. Hides, small hides to contain objects, were just as important as large hides to contain people. Because those objects were evidence, they could get you hanged. And people can run away, prayer books can't. So that's my theory. And so I'm saying that's the third room, and before this panelling was in place, there was a closet behind this, and you go in through there, and between that fireplace and that no longer has a fireplace in it, but you can see very clearly on the floor where it once was. So my theory is that was the close stool closet, the hide's behind there, and when this had a fireplace and a chimney breast, that was the little hide. So I think you can say with some confidence that of the 9 or 10 hides that were here at one point. One of them still certainly exists, and you can go in it. And the sites of 2 more are known with some good degree of certainty. So that's a site you'll all have seen a few times. Why am I saying there was no door why am I saying there was no door here? Well, that's the door to that maid's bedroom. It was made by fairly crudely cutting a vertical slice through the panelling, not even making any attempt to line it up with whichever of the Townleys paid a huge amount of money to have that panelling put in, didn't have it butchered to make a maid's closet bedroom. So that's a later conversion of that. So that was panelled solid at that point. And if we open it, you can see, if you did want to make this a feature of the public, you might have to lose a lot of storage space. But we know that all the features inside that room are early 19th century, which suggests that, okay, the hide's no longer in use, we've got all this space, we're going to make which is a fairly common thing that happens with hides. So that's in the hide space. The hide wouldn't have been all of this space. I'm saying there was closets here, and it's just that space directly between the 2 chimneys. And intriguingly, why am I saying there was no window here? There's the window in 2023, but this picture, which some of you might have seen, was drawn in the early 19th century, late 18th century. In 1750, in fact, there is no window above that door. And this picture was drawn because they were planning new windows. So we should be able to rely on what's drawn on that as a representation of how the windows were at that time, because they were planning, you can see they were planning to change from that to this. They changed the style of these windows, and on the ground floor they gave them Gothic arches and made them kind of regular, whereas they were different here. So the argument is this drawing is a representation of how it was at the time. So you've got this essentially sealed off space. Well, you wouldn't have a completely void space, so there was some use for it. And that's your argument for saying, well, a fireside closet, and then you've got the closets. And Ursula tells us, well, there was a closet and it had a hide in it. So that's our theory. And I have to say, it was one of the most exciting things I've ever done when we came here. And over the course of a couple of hours of looking around, the penny finally dropped that we were actually looking straight at where the hide was. It was... okay, how are we doing for time?
5 minutes.
Okay, whistle-stop tour of some local hides. Carlton Towers, not a million miles from here, other side of the Pennines, has the chimney. This is all 19th century. This bit is Tudor, but the chimneys are in the middle of the building, and there's one of them, and they've got, it's not as big as yours, but it's getting on that way, and they've got 3 windows that you can look down in. And I suspect the staircase hide here and that one are late hides that were designed into the building as part of construction or alterations, rather than, as we saw with the Braddock's hide, we've got to dig some of this chimney out to make a hide because we've got an emergency. Here we're looking at later hides where they had a bit of scope to plan it and think it and design it, and we see more space. That's looking down into it. That's also looking down into it. That's a view inside the hide. You see it's much more spacious. Hardwick Manor Hall on the Durham coast. That's a chimney breast in the attics, except that it isn't, because if you go round this end of it, now that brickwork has been replaced, but it was replaced in a way that retained the fact that it's still a door, and it's very realistic. Probably replaced about the time of the 1745 Jacobite rebellion, which this house was much involved in. From an earlier, because so the hide is behind. Whoops. So that's looking into it. You can see there's a seat. It is quite easily the most disgusting place I've ever been. So there's the seat. This brickwork is completely fake. in fact, the whole of it is completely fake. There is a genuine chimney breast behind here, but they put another layer of bricks because there is no discernible join down here. And then, so the original door at this end is how you would have accessed that. And so that door, that's the reverse of it. And if you know these things, that paneling, that wooden paneling, is more typical of the early 18th century than the 17th. Harvington Hall, 7 hides. 2 hides for objects, one up in the chapel, it looks like that, and a smaller one up in the roof, like the lath and plaster hutch in the roof that I said earlier. So the hide is this red triangular area. Would originally have had a plaster door in here, which might have been on hinges. There are some. These are the back of the door, and you can see there's been hinge marks there. We have 2 trapdoor hides, one of which was made by sealing the closet space next to the fireplace. There's a theme here. Off with sandstone. The hide's behind there. That's looking down into it. That's the original ladder, in just as good condition as the one in Ufton. And the other one we've seen previously. These are early hides. They're small, they're crude, they're quite easy to find. Harvington also has some more sophisticated hides. We also have a staircase hide accessed by opening a stair. It's smaller than the one at Townley. It's a double hide, so you open the stair and there's a small area here with a missing doorway and then a larger hide behind. So the idea would be they might find that small first area and it might have some prayer books in it. The priest would be safe and you can see here we've got still the remains of hinges and a bolt that formerly sealed that space. Probably the most famous hide because it's the only one that the public can routinely go into that I know of, the swing beam hide. Originally that wall had panelling on it as well, and this was a cupboard, so there was panelling across here. So that swings out and that's inside it. And the other hide at Harvington is quite difficult to describe, but you basically go through a gap in the rafters, crawl along under the rafters, and then you come into a hide which is the second biggest hide in England, narrowly pipped. And Phil, who came with me before and is the manager of this hall, has still managed somehow to get the arithmetic so that our hide's got a bigger floor area at Harvington, so it's still as big. It's not. Yours is bigger. So this is this entrance here. That's kind of how it might originally have looked with a fake plaster door on. So you go through that gap, you crawl along under the rafters, and then you end up in that. So it is quite a large space. Evidence here so that's looking, this picture is taken from the hide, it's looking back along the catwalk, and on this upright you can see there's a latch and a bolt. There's no other access to this space. And it's been, rather than this bizarre crawling space, and it's been designed to be sealed from within. So we would say that was evidence that that was a hide. Ripley Castle, anyone been to Ripley Castle? They've got a nice hide there in one corner of the room. Again, a staircase. So there's a spiral staircase behind this corner. Those 2 panels open, and the hide is, so that's a plan view from above. You can see how the orange circle is the staircase and then the yellow triangle is the hide. So you can see there, that's looking into it. It looks like it would be really difficult to get into, but the floor of the hide is sort of, if the lip of the panelling is here, the floor of the hide is only just lower than it. So you can kind of get a leg, and then you don't have to get all the way down the other side back to. So this has got also little bolt catches on the inside, and it's also got fabric nailed across the joint so that if you had a candle on the inside, the light wouldn't shine out. And A famous Jesuit priest, Edmund Campion, was discovered exactly that way, not here, a place in Berkshire. The searchers saw a light shining out through a crack in the... Anyone been to speak? Yeah, quite well known. They're a bit shy about it. They do actually have two very plausible hides. They'll tell you about one of them. Seen this one? This picture is very famous. This is not how the hide ever worked. This closet here can never have been secret. The door's not. So that's this closet door. You go up this ladder into this space, and then there's a ladder into the, which is probably the original way in if it was through here. And then you can crawl between the chimney breast and the back of the panelling into this space, which looks like that's where you come out from the chimney breast into the space, and that's looking down into it, which is as close as you can get now because there's no floorboards in it. So if you did stand in that, you'd find yourself in the room below. 2 rooms away, they've got an almost identical one, which looks like this. Also, full ceiling on a lobby below. It's a little bit smaller. This is what it looks like looking down from the roof. And you can see here, somebody's taken the trouble to chisel out what looks like a bolt socket, which might have been similar to the ones we saw often with a spring bolt as well, because you can, that kind of slopes like a Yale lock would do. So they're a bit shy about calling that one a hide, but I think you look at little details like that and you think, yeah, that's quite plausibly a hide. That focusing in on that view into it. Thurnham Hall, anyone been there? It's a hotel, country type place. One of the rooms there has, behind this fireplace, so you go through this door and turn left, and you're in this lobby, and there's a hide. So it's the hide is kind of behind that corner of the fireplace. And that has a stone door, which is enormously heavy. It's currently lying on the floor. That's looking into the hide. That stone door, the pegs for the hinges are still there, and they match exactly the holes in the doorway. And I think this is Burg Wallis, which is near Carlton Towers. This is unique among hides that I know of, because normally I've been talking about hides burrowed into the fabric of the building, hidden under a trap door. This is the hide. This Wendy House thing in one corner of the room. This is hiding in plain sight, sort of doubled and quadrupled. This is a slight fake because I've kind of tweaked the picture to look how it would have done. It's now got a door into it. The reason we know that this is a hide was because people walked past that partition for at least 250 years without realizing that the only way into it is through another catwalk, which I'll show you a couple of pictures of in a minute. It was found at the beginning of the 19th century when the then owner wanted to make some alterations to the building. The architect had kind of designed the alterations, and the builders had come in to lay out, and they found the measurements didn't fit. So there was then an argument. And they measured it all again and found out that the architect's measurements were, the builder's measurements were right for what the builder thought he was doing, the architect's measurement, and they realized that there was some lost space, and it corresponded to this. Now, you walk past that and you think, well, how can you not notice that? It's a brilliant trick. It's at the top of a staircase. So you come up this staircase, and you go up those last stairs, and you turn left. The picture that was taken from here looking this way. So you go up these stairs, you go forwards a bit, turn right, and then what do you expect to find on your right? You expect to find a blocked off area, which is the headroom from the staircase. And that's what, and in the hide, you can actually see the actual blocked off area that's the headroom of the staircase. They just built it out a bit. And this again is how it works. So the green roof is the chapel, and it has access, like at Harvington, to a catwalk under there. Here's the staircase, Now, I don't know whether it's significant that there are no windows on the side of the house. So when you're going up the stairs, you don't know how, you're actually further away from the main house than you realise. The top flight of those stairs then runs from here up to there, up to the attics, and the deception is you see what you're expecting to see, which is some allowance made for the staircase, and you don't think there's more of that, that's taking up more space than it should do. So that Wendy house of effort had kept its secret, as I say, for at least 2.5 centuries. That's inside the hide. Sorry, the left-hand picture isn't very good. So that is the actual headroom of the staircase. And they've built another wall there and another one there, just to extend it a little bit. And the only way into it until the penny dropped in 1932, I think, was through that. So the big picture is the chapel. From where that photograph was taken, you swivel left and you see the water tank, and this triangular, which we can assume had a plaster partition on it, and then crawl along there. And that is a crawl. The catwalk at Harvington is tall enough to stand up in. This one's only about that big. And the owner wouldn't let me go down it because he knew what the fabric was like. So that's looking along it. How many priest holes were there? A huge number. Any questions? Please.
Got 2 questions. The guy Owen,
Yes.
the guy that was the hide builder, he must have had a reputation for being canny, and was he publicly known as the hide builder?
No.
How did he go about his work?
It's a really good question. He was employed by Garnet, the Jesuit superior, the head of the Jesuits in the country, as a carpenter, and he obviously got a talent for it. Most of what in fact, everything we know about Owen comes from John Gerard, who owed his life to Owen's hides on 2, maybe 3 occasions at least. Owen was eventually arrested with Garnet and a couple of others in the fallout from the gunpowder plot, and was tortured to death in the Tower of London. And Gerard gives us quite a detailed description, because the guy was at that point obviously dead, so it couldn't do him any more harm. And Gerard, out of gratitude and affection for somebody he'd known for 2 decades, tells us quite a lot about how Owen went about his work. But he was the Jesuits, the priests were regarded socially as on a par with the gentry, so they would have had servants, and so Owen was Garnet's servant. They had 3 or 4 that would run odd errands, and so Owen, as a carpenter and a joiner, was very good at first of all understanding where I can get some space from, and then concealing that so that the way in. And the Jesuits basically set up what today I think you'd call an underground railway of getting young boys out to the continent to be trained as priests, and then bringing them back 5 or 6 or 7 years later, smuggling them from house to house. They had regular distribution sites, houses with lots of hides in them, where they could keep them, and then they'd be posted out to this manor house, that manor house. And Owen was a key part of that organisation. He was arrested with Gerard, who the chap in the Braddock's hide, was eventually arrested and spent 4 years in the Tower of London before, believe it or not, escaping from the Tower of London. I mean, Errol Flynn, this. And Owen was arrested with him, but the government at that point didn't know who Owen was, and some wealthy Catholics bribed him out again. After the gunpowder plot, the government knew perfectly well who he was, and Gerard's observation is that if Owen had talked, he knew every hide that the Jesuits had, and he could have closed the organisation down. And they offered to, the government said, we'll make you a rich man, or we'll torture you till you tell us the secret. And he kept the secret. He'd got a hernia. He developed a hernia at some point. He'd also had a horse fall on him, which had broken his leg, and the leg had been set, but not very competently, and he'd had to have it re-broken in order to be reset. And I wrote to the Tower of the head of antiquities of the Tower of London this summer, because they got something on the news saying we are excavating skeletons from a burial site in the Tower of London. And I said, well, keep an eye out, because there is one very distinctive skeleton that might be there. They haven't found him, who would be of great interest, because he is a saint in the Catholic Church. But yeah, so he got this hernia, which meant it wasn't legal to torture him, but they did anyway. They put an iron band around his waist to support it, hung him up by his wrists for days. The band cut into him, and eventually it burst, and that was the end of him, which was probably a mercy. But yeah, a very remarkable person.
The second question, please, sorry. So the gory bit is when they turn up and they find a priest, are they taken off to a court and found guilty and hung, or do they just kill them there and then?
It would due process. Yeah, they would be essentially, because the priests, to a certain extent, were pawns in a political game between the powerful families. So the priests would always be taken back for interrogation by the Privy Council, and were quite often not executed, depending on how useful they could be as bargaining counters. I mean, Burley and Walsingham was running a counter-espionage operation involving priests who thought that an accommodation with the government was possible. There's a whole history about that, and there was conflict within the Catholic, and Walsingham was running double agents all over the place. So no, there were, it was never summary justice. They were. Any other questions?
Is there any documented searches at Hanley? Like you
Not that I know of,
No.
no.
But I have a book about English martyrs, and I can't remember now, I've read it for years, and they mentioned a chap called Little John.
That was Nicholas. That is Owen. Yeah, it's one of his surnames. Yeah. Oh, nicknames. Yeah.
You mentioned that the priests were taken and interrogated by the Privy Council. Who were the searching authorities, though? You mentioned also that some of the guys who showed up to that one house were like half drunk when they did so. Were they just people that they sort of
It's a really good question. Because there is also there is another subplot going on here, which is these Catholic gentry didn't just exist in a bubble of their own. They were cousins with the local, and their brother had married his sister, and so on, of a fairly small social world that was the gentry and the lower nobility, and quite often, if the local magistrates got an order from London to search a house, they'd tip the cousin off. The Ufton Court, where the Treasure Hide one had been searched previously, a local tailor went to the local magistrate and said, there's Jesuits in their house, and at that point there really was. Instead of searching the house, they sent the tailor up to London to the Privy Council with a letter saying, beg to inform your excellencies that this information, we await your further instructions, knowing that by the time the instructions came back to go and search the house, the Parkins had 3 weeks to hide the evidence. That sort of thing happened a lot. So there was a group of people called the Pursuivants, or the Pursuivants, various ways of pronouncing it, who were essentially licensed by the government, and some of them were extremely unpleasant characters, and some of them were just drunken louts. Of course, in the local social hierarchy, they would be ranking well below the gentry and the local magistrates, who were nominally in charge of the search, but everybody knew that when the letter came down from London. So if you were a local magistrate, you would be being given orders by this oik that you normally wouldn't allow to clean your boots, to go and turn your cousin's house over. It was really interesting permutations of. Any more questions? Okay, if you want to read more, I do have a book on the subject. You're welcome to buy it. But other than that, thank you for your time.
Yeah, just a big thanks from me as well. That was really, really